A black hole that should not exist just appeared on a disgraced scientist's screen. Dr. Aris Thorne once had a promising career in astrophysics, but that was a lifetime ago. Now he works in a forgotten lab, his reputation in ruins. A cryptic data packet arrives from a dead channel, completely unsanctioned. It shows a gravitational anomaly in a sector of space that is supposed to be utterly empty. As he stares at the impossible data, a familiar voice crackles through a secure line. It is his old mentor, a man he thought was gone forever. "Aris, they lied to us. It is not supposed to be there. They are coming for the data." The line goes dead. In that moment, Aris Thorne is thrown into a desperate race against a hidden conspiracy that reaches the highest levels of power. By the end of this story, you will uncover the terrifying truth behind a cosmic mystery that defies the laws of physics. Who buried the discovery of this impossible object? And what is the real purpose of the entity trapped inside? What would you do if you discovered a secret that could unravel reality itself? The data streamed across his screen in a river of impossible light. Aris traced the gravitational waves, his breath catching in his throat. This was not just a black hole. It was a singularity that broke every rule. It possessed mass, a staggering amount of it, yet it emitted a faint, structured energy signature. Nothing with that much gravity should give off light, let alone a signal that looked almost like a pattern. It was a cosmic paradox, a dead star that refused to be silent. His assistant, Lena, leaned over his shoulder, her face illuminated by the eerie glow. Her voice was a hushed tremor in the quiet room. "This rewrites every textbook." Who buried this? The question hung in the air, thick and unanswerable. Before Aris could form a reply, the screens flickered and died. The low hum of the servers ceased, plunging the lab into an absolute, suffocating darkness. It was not a local failure. Someone had cut the power from the outside. They were here. "Move," Aris hissed, his training overriding his shock. He slammed his hand against a hidden panel beneath the main console, yanking out a solid-state drive no larger than his thumb. The core data, every byte of the impossible anomaly, was in his palm. They stumbled through the blackness, guided only by memory, toward the emergency exit. The only sound was the frantic beat of their own hearts, a drumming rhythm against the silence of a conspiracy that was now reaching out to drag them into the dark. The emergency exit dumped them into a service corridor, the air thick with the smell of ozone and recycled water. Aris led Lena through a maze of dripping pipes and flickering conduit lights, their footsteps echoing against the grated floor. He found a public access terminal in a grimy alcove, its screen smudged and old. Plugging in the drive felt like a desperate gamble. The data decrypted, revealing not a star chart, but a fragment of a text file, the last message from his mentor. The words were stark and terrifying. "The void heart is not a natural phenomenon. It is a lock, and someone holds the key." Before the chilling implication could fully settle, a crimson alert flashed across the public terminal's screen, independent of their own data. "Security breach. Asset retrieval team en route." The words pulsed with a cold, digital finality. They were not just being pursued. They were being hunted by a professional unit. Grabbing Lena's arm, Aris plunged them deeper into the station's neon-drenched underbelly. A chaotic world of shifting shadows and crowded markets where every face could be a threat. The lock and its mysterious key were a problem for later. Right now, they just had to vanish. The market's chaotic energy was a fragile shield. Around them, alien merchants haggled in guttural tones, and the air swam with the sense of sizzling protein and exotic spices. Aris kept his head down, pulling Lena through the throng until a figure detached itself from the shadow of a fabric stall. He was gaunt, his eyes holding a permanent weariness. This was Kale, a data broker who traded in secrets for survival. His voice was barely a whisper, swallowed by the din. "Your mentor was a brave man, Aris. Foolish but brave, he dug too deep into something called the Void Heart. The funding, it did not come from any sanctioned institute, it was private. He mentioned a name, Julian Vance. The reclusive tech baron operates beyond the rim, answerable to no one. Cale's eyes darted across the crowd, a nervous bird scanning for predators. He funded the initial discovery, then he buried it. He leaned in closer, his next words chillingly direct. Vance does not like loose ends. You are a very loose end. The sentence hung between them, a death sentence whispered in a crowded room. An instant later, a stall selling crystalline ornaments 10 meters away erupted into a cloud of silent, shimmering dust. There was no sound, only the violent transformation of matter into nothing. The panic was immediate and absolute. A scream tore through the air, then another, as the crowd became a stampeding beast. Cale vanished into the chaos. Aris gripped Lena's hand, their only thought to run with the tide of terrified bodies, the name Julian Vance burning in his mind like a brand. The stampeding crowd became their only path to survival, a river of fear carrying them away from the shimmering dust of the disintegrated stall. For days, they moved like ghosts through the station's underbelly, surviving on stolen nutrient packs and the chilling certainty that Julian Vance's reach was absolute. Their one lead was a name, and the only way to understand the lock was to find the man who held the key. That path led to the pinnacle of the station itself, to the Obsidian Spire. Vance's corporate headquarters were hosting a gala for the system's elite, a perfect cover for the secrets hidden within its opulent walls. Forging invitations was the easy part. Blending in was another matter entirely. Under the cavernous, star-domed ceiling of the grand ballroom, they moved through a sea of glittering gowns and tailored suits, the air thick with the murmur of polite conversation and the clinking of glasses. Aris felt exposed, every nerve screaming that they did not belong here, in this temple of power built upon a buried truth. Then he saw him. Julian Vance stood near a panoramic window overlooking the nebula, a figure of calm authority surrounded by sycophants. And he was speaking with a man whose uniform bore the distinct insignia of the System Defense Command. Aris guided Lena closer, using a passing server drone as cover. The fragments of conversation they caught were like ice water in their veins. The military official's voice was a low, tense grumble. The public cannot learn the truth. Panic would be incalculable. Vance's reply was smooth, utterly controlled. The artifact will be secured. Its potential is far too great to be left to chance or to amateur interpretation. My teams are already en route to the coordinates. Artifact, not black hole, not anomaly. The word confirmed everything and nothing. Before the terrifying implication could fully form, a small, spherical drone hovering near the ceiling swiveled. A pinpoint of red light washed over Aris' face. He had milliseconds to register the silent lock-on before a piercing alarm shattered the illusion of the gala. Lockdown, lockdown, security breach in the grand ballroom. The automated voice echoed through the sudden chaos as ornate doors slid shut with a series of heavy thuds. The pursuit was immediate and silent, not with shouting guards, but with sleek, automated sentry units that glided from hidden panels in the walls. Aris and Lena ran, their formal clothes a hindrance now, pushing past confused and frightened guests. They burst out of the ballroom into a hallway of polished black stone and glowing art installations, a beautiful trap. The sentries followed, their movements of fluid, terrifying precision. One raised an arm, emitting a low hum. A section of the wall beside them vaporized, leaving a smoldering, geometric hole. The message was clear: they were not being shot at. They were being herded. Deeper into the opulent maze of Vance's spire, the artifact's true nature feeling further away than ever. The only certainty that they were running out of time and space. The stolen access card felt cold and alien in Aris' hand, a sliver of someone else's authority. He swiped it across the shuttle bay's console, his heart hammering against his ribs as the massive doors groaned in protest. For one terrifying second, nothing happened. Then, with a shuddering hiss, the inner lock disengaged. They scrambled into the cockpit of a sleek, unmarked transport, its engines already whining to a low hum. Lena slid into the pilot's seat, her fingers flying across the controls with an instinctive grace Aris had never possessed. "Hold on," she yelled, and the shuttle shot forward into the void. The station's defensive turrets swiveled, tracking them instantly. Lances of brilliant energy streaked past the viewport, close enough to illuminate the cockpit with their actinic glare. But they weren't hitting. They were hurting, their fire patterns forcing Lena into a narrowing corridor of empty space. Her voice was tight with a sudden, horrifying realization. "They are not trying to kill us," she shouted over the screech of a near miss. "They are trying to capture us." The truth of it was more chilling than a direct hit. Julian Vance wanted them alive. He wanted the data in Aris' mind, the knowledge of what they had seen. Lena's hands clenched on the controls. She threw the shuttle into a violent, gut-wrenching spin, diving straight through a web of intersecting laser fire. Alarms blared as the hull grazed a containment field, sending sparks cascading from an overhead panel. "We are not going back," she snarled, and she slammed her fist down on the jump initiation sequence. The starfield outside the viewport stretched into impossible, blinding lines. For a moment, the universe was a tunnel of pure, white light. Then, with a jolt that shook the ship to its core, the stars snapped back into place, cold and unfamiliar. Behind them, the station was nothing but a distant, glittering speck, a cage they had miraculously escaped. Ahead lay only the uncharted dark and the terrifying mystery of the void heart. The silence of deep space was a fragile thing, broken only by the frantic beeping of a damaged proximity sensor. While rerouting fried power conduits, Lena froze, her tool hovering over an open panel. "Do you hear that?" It was not the ship. A new sound wove through the static of their damaged comms array, a rhythmic, structured pulse. It was a ghost in the machine, a signal emanating from the void heart itself. Aris isolated the frequency, his blood running cold as the raw data streamed across his screen. This was not the chaotic emission of a collapsing star. It was a pattern, a deliberate broadcast from the heart of the impossible. He ran every decryption protocol he had, his fingers a blur. The code was ancient, its architecture unlike anything in known systems, but a single, terrifying fragment resolved into clear text. "Containment failure imminent." The words hung in the air, stark and absolute. The void heart was not just a lock, it was a cage, and whatever was inside was about to break out. At that moment, the shuttle lurched. The gentle course corrections Lena had input were overridden. The navigation console flashed a single, unchangeable command, its origin listed as external. They were no longer flying the ship. An unseen, immense force had taken the helm, and their new heading was a direct, accelerating path straight into the gravitational embrace of the anomaly. They were not just observers of this mystery anymore. They had become part of its final, catastrophic equation. The derelict ship loomed ahead, a skeletal silhouette against the swirling violet energies of the void heart. Its identification transponder was dead, but the faded lettering on its scarred hull was still legible. ISV Calypso. Lena guided their crippled shuttle into the larger vessel's silent hangar bay, the magnetic clamps engaging with a lonely, echoing clang. The air inside was frigid and still, smelling of ozone and old decay. Emergency lights cast long, dancing shadows, illuminating floating motes of dust and frozen ice crystals. They moved through the ghost ship in silence, their boots echoing on the grated deck. The mess hall was a frozen tableau of interrupted lives, a half-eaten meal still on a table, a personal data slate floating near a chair. The bridge was worse. The crew was still at their stations, encased in a strange, crystalline frost that preserved them in postures of frantic activity. Aris found the captain's log terminal, its power cell barely holding a charge. He activated the playback, and a staticky, desperate voice filled the dead quiet. The first log was clinical. We have confirmed the anomaly is not a gravitational singularity. It is a dimensional bleed, a tear in the fabric of reality itself. Our attempts to seal the rift using focused tachyon pulses have only exacerbated the instability. The voice grew more strained with each entry. The bleed is not one way. We are detecting complex energy patterns from the other side. It is not random, it is structured. It is a language. A final, harrowing log began, the captain's voice cracking with terror. All attempts at containment have failed. We were wrong. It is not a hole, it is a door, and something is knocking. The transmission ended in a burst of static. Lena pointed a trembling finger at the main viewport. Outside, the void heart pulsed, its dark center now shimmering with a web of silver light, a pattern that looked unnervingly like a vast, intricate lock. And from their own shuttle, still docked in the bay, the same rhythmic knocking from the ghost signal began to echo through the hull. The knocking from their shuttle did not stop. It echoed through the dead corridors of the Calypso, a rhythmic, metallic heartbeat that seemed to answer the pulsing light of the void heart outside the viewport. Then the air on the bridge began to shimmer. Motes of dust and frozen ice crystals swirled, coalescing into a form that was not a body, but a being of pure, intricate light. It had no face, no limbs, only a constantly shifting tapestry of geometric symbols and flowing data streams that hovered before them. A voice, if it could be called that, resonated not in their ears but directly within their minds. It was the sound of a billion stars whispering in unison. It showed Aris a vision. He saw a city of impossible spires, not of metal and stone, but of solidified music and woven thought. A civilization that had mastered the very fabric of space and time. They were the architects, and they had discovered a cancer growing in the cosmos, a consciousness of pure entropy that consumed realities, a being they could not destroy, only contain. With their last vestiges of power, they forged the ultimate prison, a gravitational cage so perfect it was disguised as a natural phenomenon. They called it the Void Heart, and they sacrificed their entire existence to become its eternal wardens, a silent guard standing watch over a nightmare. The vision shifted. He saw the wardens, those luminous beings of data and light, beginning to flicker and fade, their vigil failing over eons they were never meant to endure. The final image was the void heart as it was now, the silver web of light cracking under a terrible, invisible pressure from within. The entity's message was a final, desperate echo across time. The wardens have fallen, the prisoner stirs. The vision of the architects faded, leaving only the cold, metallic reality of the derelict ship and the terrifying knocking that filled the silence. Before Aris could even process the warden's plea, space itself tore open behind them. A corporate warship, sleek and predatory, slid out of a warp bubble with a silent, menacing grace. Its name was the Aegis, and its hull bristled with weapons. A voice, cold and synthesized, boomed through their comms, bypassing all encryption. Dr. Thorne. You possess data that is not yours to understand. Surrender all records of the artifact. You are tampering with forces beyond your comprehension. Aris' reply was ripped from him, a raw shout into the void. We are not tampering, we are trying to prevent a catastrophe. Your boss is the one who unleashed this. The only response from the Aegis was a silent, coordinated launch. Dozens of hunter-seeker probes shot from its underbelly, each one no larger than a man's torso, swarming toward the Calypso like a cloud of metallic insects. They moved with a horrifying, collective intelligence, swarming over the derelict's hull, their cutting beams already beginning to slice through the ancient armor. They were not just trying to breach the ship. They were trying to dismantle it piece by piece to get to them. The ghostly warden flickered, its light intensifying as if in alarm. A new image flooded their minds, a schematic of the Calypso itself, with a single, pulsing point of light deep within its engineering core. It was an old escape pod, a lifeboat with a rudimentary warp drive, its systems still showing a faint power signature. The message was clear. It was their only way out, but the path to engineering was now a gauntlet of swarming probes and collapsing corridors, a race against a clock that was being actively dismantled around them. They had to lead the swarm away from engineering. Lena's eyes locked onto a damaged power conduit snaking along the ceiling, a volatile artery of raw energy. "I have an idea, but you are not going to like it," she yelled over the screech of metal as a probe carved through a bulkhead nearby. She sprinted toward the main reactor control room, her path a deliberate lure. Aris saw her plan instantly, a terrifying gambit. He provided a distraction, firing his tool welder at a cluster of probes, their insectoid attention swiveling toward the new threat. They followed her, a silver tide of destruction flowing through the Derelict's corridors, away from the pulsing light of the escape pod. Lena reached the control station, her fingers flying across the cracked console. She bypassed a dozen safety protocols, her face illuminated by the angry red warnings flashing across the screen. She was turning the Calypso itself into a bomb. The reactor's core, unstable for centuries, began to whine, a rising pitch that vibrated through the deck plates. The swarm was almost upon her, their cutting beams searing the air. "Now, Aris, now." He threw himself into the escape pod bay, slamming the manual release for the outer hull doors. The void yawned open, and the sudden, explosive decompression sucked the entire cloud of probes out into the cold darkness, along with a storm of frozen debris. For a single, silent moment, they were suspended in the glittering cloud of wreckage. Then the Calypso's heart tore itself apart. The flash was silent and absolute, a white-hot expansion that consumed the drones, the debris, and their own crippled shuttle, which vanished into a brief, miniature sun. The shockwave hit their escape pod, sending it tumbling violently. Aris fought the controls, his vision spotting, until the inertial dampeners finally groaned and stabilized their spin. They were adrift, the pod's tiny window offering a view of the expanding cloud of vaporized metal where a starship had been. A new shadow fell over them. The Aegis, utterly unscathed, slid into view, its hull blotting out the stars. A powerful tractor beam locked onto their pod, pulling them inexorably toward its belly. The warship's landing bay doors parted, revealing a cavernous, brightly lit interior that looked less like a hangar and more like a dissection lab. The opening was a monstrous maw, ready to swallow them whole. They had escaped the swarm and the explosion, only to be delivered straight into the hands of the very enemy they had fought so hard to evade. The tractor beam's hum was a death knell, vibrating through the escape pod's thin hull. The brilliantly lit hangar of the Aegis grew, a sterile and unforgiving mouth ready to digest them. Aris braced for the clang of docking clamps, for the hiss of pressurized gas and the cold glare of corporate security. Instead, the universe outside the viewport twisted. Stars became smears of light, and the massive warship seemed to lurch sideways as their tiny pod was ripped from the tractor beam's grip with a violent, gut-wrenching jolt. A new ship, all jagged angles and patched-up hull plates, filled their view. It had materialized from nowhere, its own tractor beam a desperate, orange thread pulling them to safety. A gruff voice, laced with static and a profound lack of patience, crackled over their comm. "I do not like corpos and I hate mysteries, but you too are paying customers. Now hold on, this is going to feel wrong." The ship, the Starjumper, pivoted on its axis, its engines flaring a brilliant, unregulated blue. Space folded around them. It was not a clean, calculated jump. It was a violent, short-range teleport that compressed existence into a single, nauseating second of pressure and blinding light. One moment, the Aegis was a looming giant. The next, they were staring at empty space, the corporate warship a distant, receding speck as its targeting systems scrambled to find a lock on nothing at all. The pod settled roughly into the Star Jumper's cramped docking bay with a final, metallic groan. The bay was a chaotic mess of spare parts, discarded fuel canisters, and the faint, ever-present smell of engine grease and recycled air. Captain Rork was waiting for them as the hatch hissed open. He was a man carved from hardship, his face a roadmap of old scars and newer regrets, his eyes holding a cynicism so deep it felt like a physical force. He looked them up and down, his expression unchanging. "Your tab just got a lot bigger. That micro jump burned enough fuel to buy a moon." He jerked a thumb toward the corridor. "My ship, my rules. You break anything, you pay for it. You lie to me, I space you. The corporate types want you bad, which means you are either very valuable or very stupid. My money is on both." He turned and walked away, leaving them standing in the bay, the ghost of the void heart still pulsing behind their eyes, but now with a new, gritty reality to confront. They had escaped the Aegis, but their sanctuary was a rusty tin can commanded by a man who viewed them as a business transaction. And their only currency was a secret that was tearing the universe apart. The Star Jumper was a symphony of groaning metal and the faint, acrid smell of ozone. In its cramped mess hall, the only currency was information. Aris watched Rork's face, a mask of calculated disinterest, as he offered a single, heavily encrypted data fragment. "This is a sliver of the gravitational echo," Aris said, his voice low. "It is all you get. It proves what we are running from is real." Rork's eyes narrowed, assessing the value of the digital ghost in his hand. He grunted, a non-committal sound, and tossed the data chip to a woman who had been silently observing from a shadowed corner. "This is Seelas, my engineer. If it is broken, she fixes it. If it is nonsense, she will know." Seelas was a tapestry of flesh and machine, her left arm a marvel of articulated chrome and fiber optic cabling that pulsed with a soft blue light. She plugged the chip directly into a port at the base of her skull, her organic eye closing as her cybernetic one flickered with rapid data streams. For a long moment, she was perfectly still, a statue of augmented humanity. Then her human eye snapped open, wide with a dawning, unsettling recognition. She looked from the data readout to Aris, her voice a hushed, almost reverent whisper. "This resonance, the way the energy folds back on itself in seventh-dimensional space. It is familiar. I have seen this pattern before." She paused, the weight of her own memory seeming to press down on her. "I have seen it carved into the walls of old Progenitor ruins out past the galactic rim. They were not just builders, they were weavers. They wrote the laws of physics into stone. And whatever you have found, Doctor, it is singing a song written in their language." The silence on the Star Jumper felt deeper after Seelas' revelation. Rork stared at the data, his cynicism momentarily replaced by a grim calculation. Progenitor ruins meant one thing to men like him, relic hunters and fringe dwellers, a potential payday buried under eons of dust and danger. He pointed to a star chart flickering on the mess hall wall, his finger landing on a desolate sector marked only by a faded designation, Station Epsilon. "It is a ghost, a listening post abandoned after the corporate wars. Its archives were never fully scrubbed. If your ancient builders left a message and the corpos tried to erase it, that is the place to look." The journey was a tense, silent affair. When Station Epsilon finally appeared in the viewport, it was a skeletal relic, its hull pitted by micrometeorites and scarred by old weapons fire. They docked in a bay with a ruptured door, the air inside so cold their breath plumed in the beams of their suit lights. The central server room was a tomb of dead machines, a thick layer of frost covering every surface. Seelas went to work, her cybernetic arm interfacing with a dusty terminal, bypassing encrypted locks with an effortless, unnerving grace. She whispered, "They tried to bury it deep, under layers of false logs and dummy corporations. But they were in a hurry. They left ghosts in the code. The main screen flickered to life, displaying a file header marked with a symbol Aris had never seen, a stylized beast with 3 heads. Project Chimera. The records were a chilling chronicle of deliberate silence. A secret consortium of scientists and corporate leaders had discovered the Void Heart not decades, but nearly a century ago. They had not just observed it, they had probed it. Their initial reports spoke of unlimited energy, of technologies that could reshape civilization. But the later entries grew fearful, paranoid. One data entry, signed by a director whose name had been redacted, stood out in stark, simple text. Project Chimera, success. The gate is stable for now. The word gate confirmed the Calypso's final, desperate log. But it was the final 2 words that carried the true weight of the conspiracy. For now, they had known. They had known the stability was temporary, that the lock would not hold forever. And instead of warning the galaxy, instead of marshalling every resource to find a solution, they had chosen to hide the truth, to bury the greatest existential threat in history under a mountain of lies and classified files, all to protect their power and pursue a dangerous, forbidden knowledge. They had gambled with all of existence, and the final move was now upon them. The leaked communiqué was not a dry report, but a confession etched in digital fear. It painted a picture of the consortium not as a monolithic evil, but as a cabal of terrified geniuses. These were men and women who had peered into the abyss and seen a power that could fuel civilizations for eons, a source of energy that defied all known laws of thermodynamics. But their triumph had curdled into sheer, undiluted terror. The message stated it plainly: the Void Heart is the greatest power source imaginable, but it is sentient and hostile. We must control it or be erased. They had not found a resource. They had discovered a predator, a cosmic entity that viewed their attempts at communication as an invasion. Their solution was not a warning or a collaborative effort to seal the breach. It was a desperate, arrogant gamble for control. They believed they could harness the beast, to weaponize its sentient fury and wield it as the ultimate deterrent, a sword of Damocles held over the entire galaxy. This was the chilling truth behind Project Chimera. They were not just hiding a secret. They were trying to tame a god, and in doing so, they had signed a death warrant for countless worlds, betting they could outsmart a consciousness that had witnessed the birth of stars. The Star Jumper's hull groaned, a deep, resonant sound of metal screaming under sudden, brutal stress. Alarms shrieked through the corridors as plasma fire erupted from the void, lighting up the viewport with actinic fury. Captain Rork roared into the comms, evasive pattern Delta now. But the enemy fire was preternaturally accurate, anticipating their every desperate maneuver. Aris spun toward the internal sensor display, his blood turning to ice. The transmission source was not external. It was coming from within their own mess hall. The signal was a tight, encrypted burst, and it was being sent from the very data chip Rork still held in his hand. Kale stood apart from them, his gaunt frame no longer that of a nervous informant, but of a man resolved to a terrible duty. His communicator was open, his voice calm and chillingly final. The Aegis has your coordinates. The stability of human civilization is worth a few sacrifices. Lena stared, her face a mask of pure betrayal. You sold us out for stability. You helped bury the truth that could destroy us all. Kale's eyes held a profound, unsettling certainty. I helped prevent a panic that would have shattered civilization into a billion warring fragments. The consortium's way is the only way. Control or be erased. There is no third option. The Star Jumper lurched violently as a plasma burst slammed into their primary thrusters. The lights flickered and died, replaced by the frantic crimson pulse of emergency systems. They were adrift, a wounded bird in the sights of a hunter that had been led right to them by a man who believed their lives were an acceptable price for a doomed, secret peace. Seelas moved before the final echo of Kale's betrayal had faded. Her rage was a cold, silent thing, her cybernetic arm whirring as she ripped an access panel from the wall, exposing the ship's raw nerve center. "You think you are the only one with ghosts. I was the junior systems analyst on the Calypso. I was on leave when it vanished. They told me it was a reactor breach. They told me my friends died in an accident." Her fingers, both flesh and metal, became a blur across the circuitry. She was not just an engineer. She was a survivor of the conspiracy's first cover-up, a woman who had spent her life surrounded by the very machines that had erased her past. Julian Vance did not just bury a secret. He buried my crew, and he used a backdoor I helped design to do it. The Aegis was built from the same proprietary corporate architecture. Its systems would recognize her signature, would welcome her like a trusted friend. She found the hidden channel, a ghost path woven into the warship's core programming, and she sent a single, vicious command. A cascade failure in the primary power conduit. On the viewport, the brilliant, menacing lights of the Aegis flickered, not like a power surge, but like a life fading. Entire sections of the massive warship went black, its predatory silhouette becoming a dark, listing hulk against the starfield. The relentless plasma fire ceased, the void falling into an unnerving silence. Rork did not need a second invitation. He slammed his hands on the controls, diverting every ounce of emergency power to the Starjumper's secondary thrusters. The ship groaned, shuddering as it pulled away from the deadened Aegis, a wounded animal seizing its one chance to flee the trap. They left Kale standing alone in the mess hall, his grand plan for stability collapsing into the same darkness he had helped create, a final, fitting justice for a man who traded lives for a lie. The air in the Starjumper's mess hall grew cold, a deep chill that had nothing to do with the failing life support. The ghostly Warden materialized once more, its light weaker now, flickering like a dying ember. It did not show them a city this time or a civilization. It showed them the prisoner, a formless, ravenous presence of pure nothingness, a consciousness that did not think or feel, but simply consumed. They saw realities, entire galaxies of light and life, being drawn into its endless, silent hunger, erased from existence as if they had never been. A final, desperate plea resonated in their minds, a whisper from a billion lost voices. "You must reforge the key. The lock is breaking," and then it was gone, its light extinguished. But it left something behind, burned into the main display screen. A shimmering, impossibly complex schematic of interlocking energy fields and resonant frequencies. This was not a physical key. It was a song, a specific harmonic pattern that would resonate with the very fabric of the void heart and reinforce its failing structure. The schematic was a ghost of a memory, the architect's final design for their own sacrifice. To reforge it would require an immense, focused power source, one capable of singing that song back into the heart of the anomaly. Aris stared at the intricate web of light, the weight of entire universes settling onto his shoulders. The consortium wanted to control the lock. The Warden needed them to repair it. And the only tool they had was a blueprint for a symphony of power that no human had ever attempted to conduct. A resonant frequency is not a thing you can hold in your hand. It is a vibration, a specific, perfect note that can shatter glass or, in this case, reweave reality. Aris stared at the shimmering schematic, the Warden's final gift, and the terrifying truth of their mission finally snapped into focus. Julian Vance and his consortium had it all wrong. They were searching for a physical key, a switch to throw, a lever to pull, but the architects did not build with crude mechanics. They built with music. This intricate pattern of interlocking energies was a song, the one single melody that could harmonize with the void heart's failing structure. Lena was already at a console, her eyes scanning the cascading data. Her voice was a low, focused murmur. "The power requirement is astronomical. We would need to channel more energy than this entire ship can produce, and focus it with a precision we have never achieved. She ran a new simulation, her fingers flying. The results were stark. If we generate this exact frequency at the event horizon itself, we might be able to resonate with the containment matrix. It could reinforce the lock, resetting it to its original stability. She paused, her face illuminated by a new, terrifying set of calculations. Or she continued, her tone grim, if the frequency is even a fraction of a % off, or if the power fluctuates for a single nanosecond, we will not be strengthening the cage. We will be singing the exact harmonic that unravels spacetime. We could trigger a false vacuum decay. The term hung in the air, cold and absolute. It was the ultimate cosmic catastrophe, not an explosion, but an erasure. A single miscalculation would not just destroy them or the void heart. It would create a bubble of true, stable nothingness that would expand at the speed of light, rewriting the laws of physics and wiping all of existence from the universe permanently. They were not holding a key. They were holding a tuning fork for the apocalypse, and their only choice was to play the most dangerous song ever written. The choice before them was a tightrope over the abyss. To save reality, they had to play a song that could erase it. But Julian Vance was already conducting his own terrible symphony. Across the galactic net, on every public and military channel, his voice boomed, a declaration of war against reason itself. People of the galaxy, he announced, his image projected against the starry void. For too long, we have been limited, our potential shackled by the meager resources of our own space. Today, that ends. What you have been told is a black hole is, in fact, the greatest gift the universe has ever given us. A source of infinite power, a new dawn for humanity. This is not a discovery, it is a birthright, and we will claim it. As he spoke, the long-range sensors on the Star Jumper painted a terrifying picture. Dozens of ships, a full corporate armada, blinked into existence on the edge of the Void Heart's influence. Cruisers, research vessels, and massive energy-harvesting platforms moved into a coordinated formation, their silhouettes stark against the anomaly's swirling violet and silver energies. They were not there to study or to seal, they were there to feed. They began firing colossal tachyon tampers into the event horizon, devices designed to disrupt gravitational fields and siphon the raw power bleeding from the tier in reality. The Void Heart reacted instantly. The delicate, silvery web of light, the last vestige of the failing lock, flared a painful, blinding white. The structured pulse they had been tracking for so long twisted into a scream of raw data, a sound of something ancient and vast being torn apart. The consortium was not just poking a bear. They were stabbing a god, and the god was starting to wake up. The edge of the Void Heart was a storm of silent, violent light. The Star Jumper dropped out of warp into a maelstrom of conflicting energies, its sensors screaming in protest. Julian Vance's corporate armada was locked in a furious engagement, but not with any human fleet. Their enemy was a swarm of angular, crystalline ships that moved with a terrifying, fluid synchronicity. These were the Sentinels, the last automated guardians of the architects, awakened from their million-year slumber to defend the failing lock. Laser fire the color of molten gold lanced from the crystalline vessels, slicing through corporate hull plating with surgical precision. In return, plasma arcs from the consortium ships washed over the Sentinel's shields, creating brief, miniature supernova that flared and died in the absolute quiet of space. It was a deadly, beautiful ballet of destruction, a dance of fire and light where every movement meant oblivion. The consortium's harvesting operation was in chaos, their formation broken by an enemy they had never anticipated. An enemy that had been waiting in the shadows of reality since before humanity learned to walk. The Star Jumper was a tiny, fragile speck caught between two colliding titans, one fighting for profit, the other for a purpose so ancient it had become instinct. The Star Jumper shuddered as a dying frigate vented its atmosphere in a glittering, silent plume just a few hundred meters off their port bow. In the maelstrom of the battle, this was their only chance. Rork gripped the controls of the small, angular stealth craft they had launched, his knuckles white. "This is the worst plan I have ever heard, which means it is probably brilliant." He threw the craft into a spiraling dive, using the expanding cloud of debris from the shattered frigate as their primary shield. They were a minnow swimming through a school of fighting leviathans, their stealth systems a fragile cloak against the overwhelming sensor noise. The wreckage was a forest of twisted metal and frozen gases, each piece a potential tombstone or a momentary salvation. Lena navigated from the co-pilot's seat, her voice a tight, focused monotone calling out vectors, her eyes locked on the scanner that painted the chaotic dance of energy signatures and hull fragments. Left 40 degrees, then hard down. There is a clear path through that cruiser's engine nacelle. It is still venting plasma. Rork grunted, complying, the stealth craft slipping through the gap like a ghost. The event horizon of the void heart swelled before them, no longer a distant anomaly but a wall of distorted spacetime, a swirling vortex of violet and silver that consumed the light of the dying starships around it. They were not just flying into a battle. They were flying into the mouth of the beast itself, a tiny speck of hope aiming for the heart of the storm. The stealth craft was a mote of dust against the swirling face of oblivion. Aris triggered the device, a frequency emitter cobbled together from the Warden's schematic and the Star Jumper's finest components. It hummed to life, a fragile tuning fork for the cosmos, but the hum was weak, pitifully small against the vast, dissonant roar of the breaking lock. The emitter needed a symphony of power, and they had only a whisper. Seelas' voice was calm over the calm, a stark contrast to the chaos outside. "The ship's core is the only battery big enough. I can reroute it, channel the entire output through the emitter." It was not a question of mechanics, but of consequence. Rerouting that much raw energy would overload the Star Jumper's systems in a matter of moments, triggering a catastrophic breach. It was a suicide pact with the ship itself. She did not hesitate. The Calypso crew deserves a better epitaph than failed. Her words were not a grand speech, but a quiet settling of a debt. Make it count. Across the comms, they heard the deep, groaning shudder of the Star Jumper as Seelas threw the final switch. The lights on their console flared to an impossible brightness, and the fragile emitter in their craft suddenly glowed with the ferocity of a newborn star. A pure, clean note, the first perfect tone of the architect's song, pierced the chaotic static of the battlefield. It was a sound that resonated not in the air, but in the fabric of space itself, a single, hopeful chord against the silent, hungry dark. The pure, perfect note from their emitter was a candle against a hurricane. It was not enough. The dissonant roar of the void heart grew louder, the silvery web of the lock fracturing into a spider's web of black cracks. The Star Jumper was dying, its power fading, and with it, the only hope of the song. On the stealth craft scanner, Rork saw it. The Aegis, Vance's command ship, had stabilized its crippled systems. It was turning its primary weapon, a planet cracker cannon, not toward them, but toward the heart of the anomaly itself. Vance was going for a killing blow, a final, arrogant attempt to shatter the lock and seize the raw power inside. There was no time for a second plan, no time for a heroic last stand. There was only one battery left in the entire battlefield with enough power to finish the song. Rork's voice was calm, devoid of all his usual cynicism when it crackled over the comm. The Star Jumper still has a jump left in her, just one. He was not asking for permission. He was stating a fact. The ancient, patched-up ship pivoted, its engines flaring with a blinding, final blue light. It did not warp away. It warped directly into the path of the Aegis, materializing between the planet cracker and its target. The collision was not an impact of metal, but a cataclysm of energy. The Star Jumper's overtaxed reactor, channeling every last joule of power into the emitter, met the Aegis' own colossal power core. The resulting surge was a tsunami of raw force. It flooded through the stealth craft's emitter, which glowed with the intensity of 1,000 suns. The single, pure note swelled into the full, devastating symphony of the architects, a wave of harmonic resonance that shot across space and struck the void heart. Rork's final transmission was not a whisper, but a roar of defiance against the silent, greedy dark. Tell them the Star Jumper went out with a bang. The flash was not an explosion. It was a transformation. A sphere of silent, white light consumed both ships, a final, brilliant chord in the cosmic song. And as the light faded, the screaming dissonance of the void heart ceased. The cracking, silvery web of the lock began to knit itself back together, the violent swirl of violet and silver calming into a slow, deep, and stable pulse. The song had been sung, the lock was holding, but at a cost that echoed in the sudden, profound quiet of space. The emitter's final, perfect note did not strike the void heart like a weapon. It washed over it like a bomb, a harmonic thread weaving through the fractured lock. The violent swirl of violet and silver stilled, the chaotic roar fading into a deep, resonant hum. At the very center of the anomaly, where there should have been only infinite darkness, a point of impossible light blossomed. It did not explode outward, but ear-eyes open with a gentle, geometric precision. A circular window punched through the fabric of spacetime itself. Through that opening, they saw not the ravenous entropy they had feared, but a vista of breathtaking tranquility. A pristine, untouched universe sprawled on the other side, its nebulae like swirls of liquid gold, its stars burning with a steady, gentle light. There were no scars of war, no ruins of fallen civilizations, only the quiet, majestic peace of a cosmos still in its dawn. This was not a prison breaking open. It was a gate, and for one fragile, perfect moment it was stable. The architects had not built a cage for a monster. They had built a bridge to a sanctuary, a new beginning held in trust, waiting for the moment someone was wise enough not to plunder it, but to protect it. The question now was whether anyone else had seen it, and what they would be willing to sacrifice to claim it for themselves. The silence after the song was a fragile, sacred thing. Then a new presence filled the void, not as a ghostly image, but as a feeling that bloomed directly within their consciousness. It was the entity, the prisoner, the hunger they had fought so hard to contain. But its touch was not one of rage or hatred. It was a wave of profound, cosmic sorrow, an ache so deep and ancient it felt like the grief of a dying star. It did not speak in words, but in concepts that settled into understanding. I was not born of chaos, the feeling conveyed. I was engineered. My creators built me as a cosmic failsafe, a reset mechanism for universes that have grown too unstable, too corrupted to continue. My purpose is consumption, the recycling of flawed realities so that new ones may be born from the ashes. The sorrow intensified, a heartbreaking lament for countless cycles of existence. My prison is not a cage of cruelty. It is your salvation. The architects did not hate me. They feared what would happen if I were unleashed without a universe in terminal decline. I am a tool, a final, terrible option. To free me now, while your reality still holds life and light, would be the greatest tragedy. It would be a harvest without need, an end without a beginning. Do not free me. The plea echoed in the stillness, a desperate warning from the very heart of the anomaly. The true horror was now undeniable. Julian Vance and his consortium were not just trying to harness a weapon. They were attempting to unleash a cosmic surgeon, mistaking its sacred, somber purpose for a power they could wield. And in doing so, they were on the verge of performing an operation that would kill the patient for no reason at all. The Aegis, its hull scarred and burning from the Star Jumper's final sacrifice, turned its battered prow toward the shimmering gateway. Julian Vance's voice, stripped of all corporate polish and vibrating with raw, messianic ambition, boomed across every channel. A new universe, he declared, his words a poison in the void, ripe for conquest. His ship, a blade of corporate might, began its slow, deliberate advance into the heart of the light. Aris watched the trajectory data stream across his screen, a cold dread solidifying in his gut. The entity's plea was a whisper in his memory, "Do not free me." But Vance was not trying to free the failsafe. He was trying to bypass it, to lead his armada into the pristine reality beyond, a tyrant crossing the threshold into an unsuspecting world. The choice was a vise tightening around them. To seal the gateway now would be to slam the door on Vance, but it would also lock their own universe into its grim fate with the cosmic failsafe, a slow, certain consumption waiting in the distant future. It was the safe, terrible choice, condemning their own people to a known end, but to let Vance pass through was to unleash a plague upon a virgin cosmos. He would take that untouched reality, with all its gentle stars and silent nebulae, and bend it to his will, repeating every mistake of their own history on a canvas of infinite potential. It was a choice between two kinds of doom, a slow death for their own or a swift, violent birth for another. Lena's hand found her grip tight. Her voice was quiet, but it cut through the static of the decision. He cannot be allowed to take that from them. He does not get to define another beginning. Her words were not about strategy, but about morality. It was a refusal to inflict their own corruption upon something innocent. In that moment, the theoretical became painfully personal. The fate of two universes rested on a single, terrible command. The resonance was not a key, but a question. It could ask the lock to open, or it could command it to close forever. Aris saw the pattern in his mind, the shimmering schematic from the Warden. To invert the frequency would not be a simple reversal. It would be a permanent rewrite of the lock's core programming, a final chord that would echo for all eternity, sealing the gateway and the cosmic failsafe behind an impenetrable barrier. It would not doom their universe to a slow consumption. It would grant it a true, uncertain future, a chance to survive on its own terms. His hands moved before his mind had fully processed the consequence, rerouting the emitter's output, feeding the inverted harmonic back into the system. "We are not dooming one universe to save another," he shouted to Lena, his voice raw with a final, defiant certainty. "We are ending this cycle." The Aegis filled their viewport, a dagger of arrogance piercing the heart of the light. As its prow began to cross the threshold into that pristine reality, the inverted resonance struck the gateway. The gentle, geometric window did not shatter. It crystallized. The light at its center hardened into a perfect, flawless diamond of solidified spacetime, an eternal monument to a sacrifice made not out of fear, but of hope. Julian Vance's ship did not explode. It simply stopped. Its forward section fused into the newly formed, unbreakable surface of the seal, a permanent warning to any who would follow. The bridge was closed, the cycle was broken, and in the profound quiet that followed, the only thing left was the long, uncharted road home. The diamond seal did not just close the gateway. It became a catalyst for collapse. The inverted frequency, a command of finality rather than opening, resonated through the very structure of the void heart. The anomaly, a construct of impossible energies, could not withstand the contradiction. It began to fold in on itself. The swirling vortex of violet and silver did not dissipate, but instead contracted with a violent, silent fury. Space-time itself convulsed, and from the epicenter of the implosion, gravitational waves radiated outward. These were not the gentle ripples predicted by old theories. They were tsunamis in the fabric of reality, invisible walls of force that moved at the speed of light. The remaining consortium ships, those not already destroyed by the Sentinels, were caught completely unprepared. There was no sound, only a terrible, physics-rending consequence. A heavy cruiser, its hull still glowing from weapons fire, was the first to be unmade. The gravitational shear hit it, and the vessel did not explode. It twisted, its metal stretching and compressing in ways that defied engineering, before it simply came apart into a cloud of disassociated atoms. A research vessel followed. Its delicate sensor arrays vaporized in an instant as the wave passed through it. The Armada, a symbol of corporate dominion, was being erased from existence by the very power it had sought to own. The Aegis, fused into the crystalline seal, was at the absolute center of the cataclysm. Julian Vance, trapped in his command throne, would have seen the universe outside his viewport perform an impossible trick. The stars stretched, then snapped, as the event horizon of the collapsing void heart surged inward to reclaim its own. The last thing his sensors registered was the infinite gravity well rising to meet them. There was no time for a final order, no moment for a grand soliloquy. His triumphant scream, a sound of anticipated victory, was cut into absolute silence as the Aegis was compressed from a miles-long warship into a point of non-existence smaller than a single atom, and then into nothing at all. In the wake of the implosion, the silence was deeper than any they had ever known. Where the magnificent, terrifying anomaly had once hung in the void, there was now only empty space. The gravitational waves subsided, their destructive work complete. The Sentinels, their purpose finally and utterly fulfilled, winked out of existence, their crystalline forms dissolving into light and then into memory. All that remained was the cold, clean vacuum, the distant, untroubled stars, and the profound, unsettling piece of a problem that had been permanently solved. The lock was gone, the key was destroyed, and the door to that other universe was sealed forever. They had saved two realities, but the cost of that silence was a ghost that would haunt the cosmos for eons. The collapse ended not with a bang, but with a final, gentle sigh. Where the terrifying majesty of the void heart had churned, a small, steady light now pulsed. It was a neutron star, dense and ordinary, its violent birth long past, its purpose finally served. In the profound quiet of their cockpit, the only sound was the ragged rhythm of their own breathing. Then a soft luminescence gathered before their viewport, not as a warning this time, but as a farewell. The Warden, the last echo of the architects, took form for a final moment. It did not speak. Instead, it offered a slow, deep bow, a gesture of immense and ancient gratitude that transcended any language. Its light, which had held back the dark for eons, began to gently unravel, its particles drifting apart like embers from a dying fire, each one twinkling once before merging with the background starlight. They were alone, floating in the wreckage of a war no one else would ever know was fought. The immediate threat was gone, but a chilling question now filled the void left behind. How do you go home after saving a reality that will never know your name, carrying a truth that would shatter the very peace you fought to protect? The return to known space was a quiet, haunted journey aboard the neutral surveyor ship. The crew treated them with a detached professionalism, asking no questions about the two survivors found drifting in a stealth craft near the epicenter of a gravitational event that had scrambled sensors across 3 sectors. Their debriefing took place in a sterile, white room, its silence a stark contrast to the cosmic symphony they had just witnessed. The lead investigator, a woman with sharp eyes and a demeanor of carved stone, listened without interruption as Aris and Lena recounted their story. She did not flinch at the mention of the architects, the consortium, or the sealed gateway. When they finished, she steepled her fingers, her gaze resting on them with a weight that felt heavier than gravity. The official report, she stated, her voice leaving no room for argument, will document a unique gravitational collapse event, an unprecedented but natural celestial phenomenon. She paused, letting the finality of the statement settle in the sterile air. The truth of what you have described, of what you have done, stays with us. In this room, it cannot be allowed to seep into the public consciousness. The panic would be an extinction-level event in itself. You have saved reality, and in return your reward is silence. You will carry this knowledge, this burden alone for the rest of your lives. The question now is not what you saved, but how you live with the echo of that salvation in a universe that will never know your name. The sterile white walls of the debriefing room felt like a new kind of prison, their silence a stark contrast to the cosmic chaos they had left behind. They were given new identities, a modest stipend, and a quiet posting at an obscure observatory on a fringe world. For weeks, they moved through their new lives like ghosts, the weight of their secret a constant, crushing presence. Then, one night under a sky streaked with unfamiliar constellations, Lena found Aris on the observation deck. She did not speak at first, simply handing him a data slate. On it was a star chart, but it was not the one from their official records. This one was a personal log marked with a dozen, perhaps 24, faint, pulsing markers scattered across the galactic spiral. "I made a copy," she said, her voice low and steady in the thin air. "The core resonance, the Warden's schematic, all of it. Before we inverted the frequency, I saved it." Aris stared at the map, each marker a tiny, silent scream in the void. "This is not over," Lena whispered, her gaze fixed on the alien stars. "The consortium is crippled, not gone. Their leadership is shattered and their flagship is dust. But the idea, the greed that built it, that still exists." She zoomed in on one of the markers, a system on the far edge of charted space. "And these, Aris, these are not black holes. They are echoes, fainter, quieter, but they match the Void Heart's original energy signature. The architects did not build just one lock. They built many, and if one of them is failing, how long until another one does too?" The question hung between them, turning their hard-won peace into a fleeting illusion. Their quiet retirement was over. They were now the sole guardians of a terrifying truth, standing watch over a galaxy, sleeping atop a network of cosmic fault lines. The offer arrived not through official channels, but as a whisper in the data streams of their remote observatory. It was an invitation to join the Curia, a newly formed, clandestine watchdog group operating in the shadows of the established powers. Its members were a scattered network of scientists, engineers, and former intelligence operatives who had pieced together fragments of the truth. They were the few who knew the universe was not a safe and empty void, but a library of cosmic locks, and they were hiring new librarians. Lena accepted without hesitation, her resolve forged in the fires of the Void Heart. Aris stood for a long moment, staring at the star chart with its haunting, pulsing markers. He thought of the pristine universe sealed away, of the star jumper's final blaze of light, and of the quiet, insidious greed that had nearly unraveled it all. His acceptance was a quiet vow. "Someone has to stand guard," he stated, his voice firm. "The universe is full of locks that should not be opened." Their quiet retirement was over, replaced by a new, endless vigil. They were no longer just survivors of a secret war. They had become its permanent sentinels, the first line of defense in a conflict most of humanity would never know was being fought. Their new ship was a needle of dark, non-reflective alloy. Its official designation a string of numbers they never used. It was fast, silent, and utterly anonymous. The Curia's first directive was a set of coordinates for a rogue planet drifting in the interstellar deep. A frozen world that should have been inert, but instead was leaking a faint, rhythmic energy pulse that mirrored the Void Heart's original signature. As the stars outside the viewport stretched into the blinding lines of a warp jump, Lena broke the long silence, her voice quiet but clear in the humming stillness. What if the black hole was not a mistake? Her eyes remained fixed on the tunnel of light. What if it was a test? The question hung in the void between them, a chilling new lens through which to view their entire ordeal. An entire civilization sacrificed to build a lock, a failsafe of cosmic scale, and humanity's first instinct had been to pick it. Had the architects left their creations scattered across the galaxy not just as prisons, but as examinations. Were they measuring which species was wise enough to leave a dangerous mystery alone, and which was doomed by its own ambition? The rogue planet ahead was no longer just an investigation. It was the next question on a final exam for a species that had nearly failed the first one, and the answer would determine whether they had learned anything at all. The hum of the ship's engines was the only constant sound in the deep, a low thrum that vibrated through the deck plates and into his bones. Aris sat alone in the dimly lit cockpit, the star chart of cosmic locks glowing softly before him. It was in this silence that the signal came. It was not a broadcast on any known frequency, but a data ghost, a whisper that slipped through their most secure firewalls without a trace. It resolved into a single audio file, crackling with the static of immense distance. He played it and his blood turned to ice. It was a single word, spoken in a voice he had heard die in a flash of white light, the voice of his old mentor. Soon, the word hung in the air, a spectral promise and a dire warning. He looked out the viewport at the endless, indifferent stars, their cold light a reminder of the scale of their new war. They had sealed one lock, but the universe was vast, and the things that waited in the dark were patient. Their work had only just begun, and some mysteries were never truly solved, only waiting for the right moment to whisper again. The memorial was held under a sky of drifting orbital platforms, a sea of quiet faces bathed in the light of 1,000 floating candles. The names of Captain Rork, Seelas, and the lost crew of the Calypso were etched into a new monument of obsidian and starlight, a public tribute to heroes who had supposedly averted a gravitational catastrophe near a rogue pulsar. A news drone hovered nearby, its broadcast a soft murmur through the crowd. The greatest discoveries, a reporter's voice intoned, often come with the gravest responsibilities. The words were a hollow echo of the truth they had buried. Aris stood with Lena, the official narrative settling around them like a shroud. They were applauded for a bravery the universe could never truly understand, honored for a story that was a pale ghost of the real one. The crowd saw a monument. They saw a headstone for a secret. Every handshake, every somber nod of gratitude was a reminder of the silence they were sworn to keep. This was the legacy, not of triumphant heroes, but of reluctant guardians, forever separated from the world they saved by the very weight of their victory. The ceremony was a beautiful, necessary lie, and its success meant their work in the shadows had only just begun. The neutron star they had named Thorne's Star pulsed with a steady, metronomic rhythm, a silent clock in the void. From their hidden observatory, a station carved into a rogue asteroid, Aris and Lena watched its unblinking light. Lena leaned back from her console, the star's constant data stream reflected in her tired eyes. "It is quiet," she murmured, "for now." Aris did not look away from the main sensor array, his fingers making a minute adjustment to its focus. His vigilance was a physical presence in the room, a shield against the memory of cosmic screams. He was not watching a star. He was standing guard over a tomb, and the universe had a way of disturbing its most sacred graves. Their silent vigil was the price of a truth too terrible to speak, a burden carried for a civilization that slept peacefully under a sky full of silent, waiting locks. The silence in the asteroid observatory was a fragile thing, broken only by the steady drip of recycled water and the hum of a cooling fan. Lena had been running a new decryption algorithm on the Warden's schematic, peeling back layers of data like the skin of an ancient onion. When she finally spoke, her voice was a low tremor in the quiet. "This is not the original design. The Wardens we met, the ones who sacrificed themselves, they were not the first. They were the second generation." The data stream on her screen resolved into a star map of impossible age, its constellations unrecognizable. It pointed to a race they were calling the Progenitors, the true architects. They did not just build the locks, Aris, they built the builders. The Wardens were their creation, an automated guard system set to watch over the cosmic failsafes for all eternity. But the file, this ancient, fragmented log, ended not with a declaration of victory, but with a philosophical riddle that chilled the air in the room. A single line, etched in a code that predated human civilization. Every prison has a warden who watches the wardens. The question echoed in the stillness, transforming their understanding of the entire cosmic order. If the progenitors had created the wardens, who had created the progenitors? And more terrifyingly, if the wardens could fail over the eons, what did that say about the stability of the entities who had made them? The universe was not just a library of locks. It was a chain of command, and they had just discovered a broken link at the very top. The question of who watches the wardens became the silent engine of their new mission. It was a riddle that demanded more than just two minds, so they began a quiet search through the Curia's most trusted channels. They were not looking for soldiers, but for survivors. They found Ilara, a pilot whose ship had once been caught in the gravity well of a silent, drifting relic that matched no known design, an experience that had left her with a permanent distrust of empty space. They found Jax, an engineer whose work on deep-range comms had once decoded a repeating, mathematical plea for help from a star system that officially did not exist. And they found Kaelin, a xenobiologist who had discovered fossilized, non-terrestrial DNA in asteroid ice, a finding that was promptly classified and buried. These were not people who craved adventure. They were individuals who had already seen the cracks in the world and needed to know why they were there. In the dimly lit briefing room of their new ship, the silence was heavy with unspoken histories. Aris stood before the small, assembled team, their faces illuminated by the soft glow of a star chart dotted with phantom markers. He did not welcome them or thank them for coming. His voice was low, stripped of all pretension, carrying the weight of a truth they were all about to share. "We are not explorers," he stated, his gaze meeting each of theirs in turn. "We are shepherds. Our duty is to ensure the flock never sees the wolf." The analogy was simple, stark, and utterly clear. The flock was all of civilization, going about its daily life, oblivious and safe. The wolf was the terrifying, fundamental truth of the cosmic locks, the fail-safes, and the broken chain of command that guarded them. Their job was not to fight the wolf, but to keep it hidden, to mend the fences and stand watch in the dark so that everyone else could sleep peacefully under a sky they believed was merely beautiful. It was a vow of eternal vigilance, a promise to live in the terrifying space between knowledge and peace, for the sake of a universe that could never know their names. The long-range sensor ping was a soft, insistent chime in the quiet of the ship. For days, it had been their only companion in the void. Lena leaned forward, her brow furrowing as she isolated the signal from the background static of a nearby nebula. Her hands stilled over the console. "It is the same," she whispered, her voice tight. "The repeating pattern, the harmonic resonance, it is identical to the void heart." The data streamed across the main screen, a ghost from a sealed tomb. It was the same structured pulse, the same complex, almost musical code that had preceded the collapse of the anomaly. There were no words, no grand declaration, just a grim, unspoken understanding that passed between them in the dim light. Their search for answers had just become a race against time. This was not a new mystery to be solved. It was a countdown they had heard before, and they knew exactly how it ended. The next mission had not been assigned. It had reached out from the dark and found them. Its silent siren sung a promise of another cataclysm waiting to be born. The star chart on the main view screen was no longer a map of possibilities, but a graveyard of silent alarms. Each pulsing marker represented a lock, a failsafe, a secret that could not be allowed to whisper. Aris Thorne stood on the bridge of the event horizon, the weight of two universes a familiar pressure against his mind. He turned from the screen, his gaze moving over the small, dedicated crew he had gathered. Lena met his eyes, her resolve a steady flame. Ilara's hands were poised over the navigation console, ready to fly them into any silence. Jax monitored the complex sensor suite, and Kalen watched the biological readouts, a sentinel against the unknown. They were not heroes celebrating a victory. They were caretakers reporting for a permanent graveyard shift. The universe is built on mysteries, Aris said, his voice quiet but carrying to every corner of the bridge. And it is our job to make sure the dangerous ones stay buried. He gave a single, slow nod. Let us go to work. On the main screen, the starfield began to stretch, the familiar constellations blurring into brilliant, impossible lines as the Event Horizon's warp drive engaged, carrying its guardians of silence toward the next great